We're live. There's no scores table. There was no intro video this time. He's Mike Niziolek. I'm Zach Osterman. This is Mind Your Banners for November 25th, 2025. A couple of programming notes really quickly. Our scouting podcast, talking with Nathan Barrett about Purdue, will go up Wednesday. There will, in all likelihood, not be a Friday rundown this week because there is a football game, a literal football game on Friday. And because guess what it is, Mike? It's Thanksgiving. Look what I can do. Look at all these fun effects that I can put on the screen. We can say happy Thanksgiving to people. You know what? That's a nice segue into our first segment here. Give me your Thanksgiving advice. What are your top Thanksgiving tips? What do you make for Thanksgiving?
I don't make anything.
What?
No.
Come on.
No. I've worked the last, however many years. So it's
that's fake news because I was in the Bahamas last year. You were not.
Yeah, we got other stuff going on. I covered the Indiana-Purdue game the next day or 2 days later.
2 days later, and I was there.
Yeah, so my wife usually goes up, visits family, and I have to stay back. So,
you want to come to our family Thanksgiving on Thursday?
If I say yes, you'll be like, you're not invited, sucker.
You can come down for some turkey. I'm smoking a bird.
Are you?
Yeah. The key is overnight brine. Don't dry brine. Not a dry brine guy. Although I think you typically do that more with beef. And then about halfway through, you pull it off, you put it in a pan, and you absolutely drown it in butter. And that just puts all kinds of fat and flavor back into a bird that obviously normally does not have very much. So
there you go.
Yeah. You're more than welcome to come down. I'm not going to come get you. All right. This isn't a Chicago situation.
Mind your birds.
Mind your birds. Mind your bucket game. It is bucket game SZN, as it were. How do you want to approach this? Listen, Indiana is a prohibitive favorite in this game. There is very little optimism in West Lafayette. I have been plenty of times on the other side of this specific dynamic in the bucket game where Purdue, maybe not at quite the level that Indiana is at right now, but where Purdue football is clearly playing for something, is clearly, kind of ambitious and reaching upward, and Indiana fans have just completely and utterly shifted their gaze to basketball, and the general vibe around the game tends to reflect that. And I think that is, in a lot of ways, what it feels like we are seeing here. Purdue basketball is number one in the country already with some really impressive wins. There's probably more optimism around Barry Odom, near the end of year one, even at 0-8 in the Big Ten, than there was certainly this time a year ago in within the Purdue fan base about football. But you really do feel like this is just this is only one side of this is really in any meaningful way, I think, looking forward to Friday night.
Yeah, and I wonder if it might be different if there was more, if they brought back more players. They have 82 new players, 82 new faces is what their media guide said, 50 plus, one of two schools with 50 plus transfers. I guess West Virginia was the other. So, there's not a lot of players left on that team that will take last year's loss personally, that were on the field, because that was an embarrassing game for Purdue. Anybody that played.
Well, or even like because I already recorded the podcast with Nathan, even like guys that you can have been inside the rivalry long enough that you can kind of play up that sense of,
right,
you're from here, you've lived in this rivalry for 4 years. It means something. Like there's not a lot of attachment to it.
But like I said, but like the players that played in that game that would want some measure of revenge from, they ran a fake punt in the third quarter up 38. That should be that should be on all their minds, but I don't think it will be because nobody on that sideline was really there for it. So I think that takes away from sort of the buy-in from it. And like you said, this team's down and down bad, not necessarily what it was last year in terms of like the blowouts that they suffered kind of along the way. I mean, they've been in some close games. Certainly, when you look at, I think that's what Kurt Cignetti talked about, that you can't take them too lightly because they have, lost to Michigan in a one possession game. We're leading in the fourth quarter, I guess, against in the second, all the way up to like the last 7 minutes against Minnesota and Rutgers. So I mean, they are more competitive than they were last year, but the talent advantage should be such that this game is not close.
Yeah, like even to like the untrained eye, Purdue has looked, just sort of like less listless. Like last year, you just felt like you were watching a program that just had, no direction and kind of knew that it didn't. I think there is justifiable faith in Barry Odom, but I think, there's and we'll find out how to contextualize that with that Washington game, here in a couple of days. But like part of what made that Washington result jarring, I think at one point Purdue was down 42-3 in that game, maybe even 49-3, was that it had felt like Purdue had gotten those out of its system. Like those just, I mean, like even like I was at the Ohio State Purdue game, they lost 34-10. They still kept Ohio State honest, for a decent amount of that game. You talk about the Michigan game, the Minnesota game, the Rutgers game. I mean, I watched a little bit of that game against Illinois not long after Indiana played Illinois. And, Purdue loses that game because it's just not good enough on the field talent-wise. But it doesn't lose that game because there is some sort of lack of spirit or togetherness or whatever. That's what made that Washington game, and we can talk about kind of the scheme of it in a minute, but like what made that Washington game to me, not to turn this into a Purdue-centric podcast, so notable was that was the first time it really had looked like Purdue just sort of down tools and just sort of got run over, like truly, genuinely just bulldozed out of the way this season. And, Caleb here asked, will this be a stat padding game for Fernando's Heisman case? I mean, the weather may not help that. It's going to be very, very cold. But it's also one where if you look at, I mean, Purdue's allowed more than 1,000 yards rushing and 13 touchdowns on the ground in its last 5 games. One of the common themes in Indiana's big blowout wins this year has been the ability to just run through teams on the ground. And if that happens again, and Washington did that last weekend, and I don't believe Jonah Coleman played in that game. So, like if that happens again,
the final score even more crazy,
right? If that repeats itself on Friday night, like Fernando Mendoza might not need to throw 25 passes. I mean that has been the constant theme. UCLA, Maryland, Illinois,
and I don't. Last year, Curtis Rourke, when you go back, 6 touchdowns, 399 yards, or something like close to that, close to 4 yards. That was all about making a statement to the College Football Playoff Committee.
He threw 2 touchdown passes in the fourth quarter. Indiana was.
He only played like he played less than 5 minutes in the fourth quarter. But that was all about sending a message. It was needed and it was purposeful. It wasn't about Purdue. This year, they don't really need to do that. I think this year the goal is to get out as quickly as possible to be healthy. Like, if they were a bubble team again, and Mendoza was a Heisman contender, those mesh well together, right? And you kind of get him his numbers. But I think they don't need to do that because I think you're good. Obviously, you're playing in the Big Ten title game if you win, and that'll be enough to sort of allow Mendoza to win it or not. And I just think you need to be healthy, and you've kind of seen the last couple of weeks with losing guys that you have to be careful here. Like everything is set up now where you've got the bye in your sights, you've got the Big Ten title game. I don't think Kurt Cignetti's worried about the Heisman this week. I don't think he's ever worried about the Heisman, but I don't think it's going to factor into how long or what the game plan looks like for Mendoza.
No, I don't think so. I mean, like that kind of leads me into, again, kind of talking more on scheme, like what is IU's game plan? And personally, like when I look at those rushing numbers, I think it is establish the run and see if you can do to Purdue what you did to UCLA and Maryland, because, and Mendoza wasn't great in either of those games, kind of for different reasons in each one. Obviously the Maryland game kind of starts badly and then he's pretty much fine after that. But like the theme of those 2 games is Indiana just the theme of those two games is that Indiana just, as you've pointed out, it's not like, yes, they're explosive, but it's not like they rush for 200 yards in the first 25 minutes. They just they keep coming at you. They rotate backs.
Well, they're shortened games too. I think you've talked about that a lot. Like they just have run a lot of clock to less plays on the defense, and that's kind of been the focus as opposed to like, 4 quick.
If you can get to a place in the fourth quarter where you're up 30 and Kobe Martin can just go chew up 6 minutes of clock, they're going to do it. Yeah.
And the defense has played 46 plays. One thing that I think is worth pointing out in terms of Purdue, I don't know how much Nathan talked about this, but their quarterback situation seems to have turned into when you have two, you have none, which is a great place to be in the last week of the season. So Ryan Brown, I guess, is going to be the starter, but he only played a little bit in the Washington game. Then Malachi Singleton kind of finished that one out. So I don't know what they're going to – I mean, if it's going to be more of a rotation or what their plan is. But that just seems to me to be – especially against a defense that it's really hard to get a rhythm in and, like, come in and come out and to because I think you need to see what this defense is doing, especially sort of get comfortable and make good decisions. And that has the makings of, I think, a disaster as well.
Yeah, I mean, like Purdue's had some real skill position issues this year, kind of to start with. Devin Mockabee is out for the season. There have been some real issues with drops this season. A little breaking news for you here. You ready? Breaking news. Bryant Haynes officially a Broyles Award nominee. So breaking news. The email just hit my inbox.
A finalist.
No, just a nominee. There are 30 of them. But obviously deserving. Probably will be more than just a nominee as time goes on. No, Maccabee's out for the season. They've had some real issues with drops in their receiver core that have kind of let Ryan Brown down at different times. Singleton, like they had been trying to mix him in more in terms of, short yardage packages and things like that, but they really weren't being that creative with him. Like he was running the ball a lot of the time. And then, as you say, he just kind of takes over in the Washington game, and he looks okay. Obviously, I think by the time he's in there, the game is long past, decided, but he was 16-28 for 150 yards and a touchdown. He also ran 11 times for 22 yards. He took 2 sacks in that game. So like that's 9, at least in theory, 9 designed rushes for a quarterback. You can see that that Purdue maybe trusts his legs a little bit. But to your point, like if it's week, however we want to define this, 13, 14, 15, both these teams have had a couple of bye weeks now, and you're asking your offensive coordinator who the starting quarterback is, like that's just not a good place to be in. And it's not a good place to be in. They've had the bye. But if you have that uncertainty at any point, and then you're giving whoever starts less sort of prep time for one of the toughest defenses that they're going to see all season, that's awfully difficult. Now, I think you can make an argument for Singleton. Obviously, he's dual threat. He's also got a future at Purdue. I think Ryan Brown is out of eligibility after this season. So like there maybe is an element of that too. But
I don't think that's right.
I thought Ryan Brown was a redshirt senior. I'll look it up while
he's a sophomore.
Then I'll look it up.
Ryan Brown is a sophomore. So
okay. What was I thinking of it? Anyway,
he's at the end of his clock. It's over.
He's actually sued for less years of eligibility.
That would make absolutely more sense when you segue from the older guy at the end of a season that's lost to the younger guy. Yeah, that makes sense. But like here, they're both sophomores, so I'm not sure what. I mean, we don't have to analyze it too much, but what they're doing. But I just think in a game like this, where the defensive scheme is so challenging for a quarterback to just have a guy get out of maybe at one point they just switch and go with the second guy. But if they're going to bounce back and forth, I mean, that's just I can't see that being a good thing.
I think the bigger questions are on defense. We talked about their run defense. They're 14th in the conference in run defense. And just to give you a sense for what it's looked like lately, their last 5 games, 50 for 232. This is the opponent's numbers. 50 for 232, 48 for 184, 39 for 253, 43 for 170, and 40 for 212. They've allowed at least 2 and as many as 5 rushing touchdowns in each of the last 4 games. The team that frankly ran it worst on them in that stretch is Ohio State, and Ohio State just doesn't run the ball all that well, which is kind of surprising, but we can talk about that later. I suspect we will have a need to. And then if you shift over to the passing side, they are, again, you're not worried about Fernando Mendoza's numbers. It is going to be cold. You're right that this is kind of a let's just win the game with a minimum of fuss, whatever. But man, some dudes have thrown up big numbers on them. Like Desmond Williams at Ohio State went 18 for 22 for 294 and 2 touchdowns. Julian Sayin only had 1 touchdown pass, but he had 303 and completed almost 82% of his passes against them. Luke Altmaier shredded them earlier in the season. I don't understand how he threw for 1 touchdown when he threw for 390 yards on 22 attempts, which is that is a video game number. So there's it is just – it's hard to imagine Purdue being able to make Indiana one-dimensional. If you're Indiana drawing up this game plan, it's hard to imagine a world where Purdue's going to be able to make you one-dimensional. But then even if they do, they're just not very good defensively. And, it's just statistically, there has not – put it this way. Consider the genuinely good quarterbacks they've faced this season. Jaden Mayava went for 282. CJ Carr went for 281. Luke Altmaier went for 390 on 22 attempts. I can't get over that number. Ethan Kaliakmakis went for 359 on 27 attempts. Sayin went for 303 on 33 attempts. And Williams, who is a true dual threat guy, went for 294 on 22 attempts. I'm assuming, because I'm just looking at the game logs, I'm assuming he had all 22 of those attempts in the Washington game. They have not been any quarterback that is competent with a competent offense around him. They have not been able to do much with this season. And I don't know necessarily that Indiana's going to intentionally be inflating Fernando Mendoza's passing numbers. I just think they might get there anyway, to a certain extent. You know what I mean?
It's probably all dependent on how much he plays. If they're up this time 38-0 in the third quarter, you got to take him out of the game. Curtis Rourke played a lot more of that game than he needed to. But they can't afford that this year with what's ahead of them. And so, not that they could afford injury last year, but I'm just saying in terms of what this team, all the starters need to get out of the game as soon as possible. I think that's kind of the goal. And however you can get there, you can get there.
Well, let me throw that back at you. Just one devil's advocate thing, and I broadly agree. I don't think they're going to bench him at halftime, but I do broadly agree. The one devil's advocate piece of that is you haven't played a football game for 2 weeks, and if you win this, you have a really, really big one, almost hands down the biggest game in program history. In the week after that, is there any consideration if you're Kurt Cignetti for the idea that not that you artificially inflate snap numbers, but that you also don't hook guys too quickly, knowing that a little bit of getting them back into a little bit of rhythm after, according to everything he said, giving them a ton of time off through the bye week maybe makes some sense too.
No, I don't see with 4 extra snaps and you risk injury gets you playing 4 extra snaps. But Purdue is not going to come in handy in Indianapolis against Ohio State if you're missing an Aiden Fisher or a Mikel Kamara or anybody those guys that are banged up. Elijah Surratt, tweaks his hamstring because he was in and he's up 45-0. What questions are you going to get after that? There would be no reason to do it. And they've let guys play deep into games in these blowouts. But I think in this one, you've got to be careful. And I understand you don't want to take them out in the first quarter, but if you're up 38-0 at the half, why are you playing in the second half?
That's a natural segue into a brief one, but a brief injury update. You had the story this week. We were both there, but you wrote it, so I'll give you the floor. on where Indiana's injured players, some notable absences are, according to Curt Cignetti, heading into this week.
Well, yeah, it sounds like they'll be in a better spot than they were. Elijah Surratt expected to start. Camaras expected to start. His was a shoulder thing. Surratt was obviously dealing with the hamstring. Drew Evans, no, he did not rule him out, but he did not share any information, and we still do not know what the injury is. So hard to say, but obviously maybe encouraging that he didn't immediately rule him out. I don't know, but I'd be surprised if he was back. If he's close, they probably hold him to Ohio State, but because he said a few weeks back when the Maryland game. And
it was Maryland.
What was that? It's been almost,
that was the beginning of the month. Yeah.
Yeah, so it's been almost 4 weeks. So timeline there, he's probably at it, but we just don't know. We don't know anything about the injury, so it's hard to say, one way or the other, whether there should be optimism.
I think it's at least because, like, when you hear a few weeks in November, even in like the playoff era, you start to worry, like, is this something that's not really going to go away? Like, is this something that is just he's going to be fighting it, and he's never really going to get back? I think at very least, if you're an Indiana fan, it's encouraging to hear that, like, Purdue is potentially on the table for Drew Evans. And I agree with you that I think if he's 50-50, maybe even like 60-40, he doesn't play.
I think you just hold him, yeah.
But I think it's at least encouraging to the idea that, that when Curt Cignetti said that was the first indication that I had heard from Curt Cignetti that at very least Drew Evans will be healthy by the time the playoff starts. And, maybe Ohio State, maybe Purdue, but at very least, if he's, it stands to reason, I don't think it's a lofty assumption, that if Drew Evans is fighting to be fit for the Purdue game, then at very least you're going to have him back for the start of your playoff run, whenever that is. And presumably in particular, because if you win this game, you probably clinch a bye if you're Indiana at this point. So, I think the thing that, as much as anything, that Alabama loss might have done is kicked out the idea of the loser of either the SEC or the Big Ten championship game getting passed by like a one-loss SEC team lurking at 5. So,
before we transition, I have a topic. And this, maybe we could crowdsource this too, because this is a question I was going to get you. So I talked to Mark Deal yesterday. I was trying to work ahead to get some perspective, historical, if they make the Big Ten title game. He's been in the athletic department much of his life, basically, because his father played here, his brother played here. The stat he shared, their family has more wins in the Bucket family than anybody. I said, is that an official stat? He's like, I'm not sure if it's official. But anyway, his point was, obviously was not looking past the Bucket game. So he was not playing ball, but he talked about this being the most consequential Bucket game in West Lafayette for Indiana in program history. And why he said West Lafayette, because the 67 was in Bloomington and was probably, you could rank him up there. I don't know if you'd put this up there, but like, obviously undefeated seasons on the table. You've got the playoff of it all and the Big Ten title game. And so I was looking back and seeing, in the modern era, like, maybe 67 forward or 60s forward, what are the most consequential Old Oaken Bucket games in Indiana history for Indiana? Not best games, not most memorable games, but most consequential. What say you? I came up with just 4, and I was struggling to come up with a 5th. What say you? And obviously 67, they're playing. Purdue couldn't make the Rose Bowl, but then they wanted to create a 3-way tie, and then they were voted into the Rose Bowl. Purdue was number 3 at the time. I think they had lost the previous year 52-3. So, I mean, huge win to set the context of that. But any other consequential Rose Bowls, Old Oaken Bucket games that you would put on that list? Obviously, none that rivaled those two.
Yeah, you're right. Like 40, 67, and I mean 45 also. Like, if we want to go back that far.
Yeah, but I said modern era. That's what I was.
Well, I guess I consider modern era after World War II. But to your point, I mean that won Indiana its last Big Ten title. It was not the Big Ten Conference yet; it was still the Western Conference. So, like, that is That is not quite modern era. I wrote a list while you were talking. There are 4 that come to mind for me, 2 each in West Lafayette and Bloomington. 89 in West Lafayette, 07 in Bloomington, 19 in West Lafayette, and last year in Bloomington. Working backward.
Okay,
I'll work backward. Last year is obvious. Indiana
last
needed
year's on my list
to win that again in the playoffs. 19, that team that went from feeling like a fun season to a really like remarkable season when they beat Purdue. They needed double overtime to do it. It was just a great game back and forth. And actually, in particular, Tywan Mullen, who was an All-American defensive back, and David Bell, who was an All-American wide receiver, basically played a personal bucket game. Bell went nuts. I think Mullen had at least 1 pick. Like, it was just so fun. And that elevated them from they'd gone 6-6 a couple times recently, and then they'd had the 2 5-7 seasons under Allen. And I think for Allen in particular, there was the Jeff Brom of it all. And Brom had come in right after Allen had taken over for Wilson, and Indiana didn't conduct the search, and Brom went to Purdue from Western Kentucky, and there was a feeling like, well, maybe Indiana could have had Jeff Brom, and I think that was an important win for Tom Allen in the context at the time, but also like Indiana at that point had not had that many 8-win seasons, right? And to win in double overtime in West Lafayette, very dramatic, to clinch an 8-win season and the first ever January bowl game for the program. That was, or at least Florida January bowl game, something like that. 07 was the year after Hepner died, the Austin Starr field goal. Like that is, I think, a moment frozen in time for a generation of IU football fans stormed the field, etc. And then 89, and I actually referenced this in something I wrote today about why Curt Cignetti's not overlooking Purdue, and I don't think Curt Cignetti necessarily knows much of the history of 89. But in 89, Indiana was 5-5. They went up to West Lafayette. They were convinced that if they won the game and got a bowl berth, it would be like the sort of the last brick in the wall of Anthony Thompson's Heisman candidacy. Purdue just shut Thompson down. He didn't rush for 100 yards that day. They were up 15-14. Bill Mallory actually sent Thompson back to return a kickoff, which he never did. He returned it like deep into Purdue territory. Purdue stuffed Indiana again, and then their kicker missed a field goal, and they lost the game. And there are members of that team, like Mark Hagan has said this to me, who are convinced that like they lost their star running back, the Heisman Trophy, that day. And it may be true, it may not. Like, I believe that was at the time the second closest Heisman vote ever. That was Andre Ware over Anthony Thompson. It was very, very close. It remains among the closest. I'm not sure exactly where it ranks now, but that was the other one. Again, like they won 3 of them, but that 89 one, like there are members of that team that are convinced that if Indiana had won that game at Purdue, that Anthony Thompson would have won the Heisman a week later or 2 weeks later or whatever it was.
So that was my list. I did not have 19, but because it was not as clear to me. There was the consequence of it. Obviously, they lose. They still were bowl eligible. They get to 8 wins, but something surround that. I think the Anthony Thompson game is fascinating in terms of, he could have probably gotten to 2,000 yards if he had played the extra game. It wouldn't have been out of the realm of possibility. He still had the rushing title and led the country in touchdowns as well. But yeah, I think that was,
and he set a bunch of records that season. Like he set what
single game rushing record. Yeah.
That I think stood until Danian Tomlinson maybe. And it was also like that was at a time, I mean, they beat Purdue, I believe, the 2 years prior to that. I know they beat them at least the 2 years after that. The year before, in 88, they'd beaten Purdue 52-7. The year before that, in 87, they'd beaten Purdue 35-14. Like, until Kevin Wilson had a run of 4 straight bucket wins, which is the longest since like 1909 or something. I can't remember what the exact number was. But until that, it was 13-16. Until then, like that period in like the late 80s and early 90s, when Indiana was a fringe Big Ten contender, as often as not, they had All-American running backs, All-American defensive players, etc. That was about as much as Indiana could ever, for a sustained period of time, have claimed to, quote unquote, own the rivalry in football. and that was the one they lost, I think still sticks with some players from that era. Because again, like this may be true, it may not. Like, there's no empirical way to know if the voters were like, oh, no, we're going to ding him for that loss. But there are members of that team that are convinced that, like, basically that they let their teammate down, and that if they'd found a way to win that game, Anthony Thompson.
If you get to 2000, that's a nice number to sort of have under your belt too. I mean, voters like that kind of stuff. I mean, it's easy. I think it was a year after Barry Sanders set the record, but I mean, is 19 belong with that grouping of games though? Do you think?
It is probably, like, I mean, it's hard to say. Like, it's probably the least among them. But then the flip side, like, if we're really nitpicking out these, then, like, we can talk about the importance of last season, but they won it 66-0. So, like, there was.
So I think last season is number 2, because if they needed to send a message to the committee. They were a bubble team, and, like, because I think people forget, like, it wasn't a guaranteed lock. I mean, they were like the last team in, like, and I think because the Ohio State game went so poorly for them, and they were so,
and it was so recent. Like, if that game had happened like October 1st, maybe it doesn't matter. But because there's always a recency bias to this,
everybody forgot that first 10 weeks basically, and the first 9 weeks where they didn't play a game that was competitive. They beat everybody, the doors off everybody. I just think that was so important. The style, like, even Seghetti mentioned, on Monday, he's like, I don't talk about style, points just happen naturally. After the game, last year, it's like style points are earned. He said it with a smile, and obviously, that was the message of the committee that we belong there. And so I think that was hugely.
The reason I would include 19 is just because at the time it felt so meaningful. Indiana hadn't won 8 games in a season since 1993. There was a feeling, and listen, for another 12 months, we were proven right to believe this. There was a feeling that Tom Allen was building something. Like, that was his team. That was like one of the features of the Tom Allen era was that he inherited a group that was really top heavy with a lot of good seniors. But then, like, the junior, like the 3rd and 4th year classes on his first roster were just very, very threadbare. They'd had a ton of bad luck with injuries, in particular, guys who'd had to, like, just basically quit football. And he recruited, like, the bulk of that roster, not all of it, but the bulk of it, and got a lot of those guys to buy in, guys like Freifogel and Penix and Mullen and whoever else, and got them to buy into, like, the idea that, like, we're going to make this something that it wasn't before. And if they'd gone 7-5 and lost to Purdue, I think it would have just taken a little bit of something off the season, frankly. I think it felt,
if they had played 20, would that have been on the list then?
Yes. Oh, definitely. And again, I mean, that's one where, like, history will never know. Like, they would have won that game, obviously. Like, they were on a mission. Purdue was not good that year. They had Purdue had a lot of injuries that season. And the other thing too is, if they had played in 20, that was the only way they could have made a credible argument for not changing the rules and letting Ohio State into the Big Ten championship game. And, like, internally, people within the program in 20 said, like, we played Ohio State, we lost. Like, don't make us out to be some victim. But part of the reason I've never entertained that when fans have brought it to me is they were shut down. Like, they had a team-wide COVID pause. They could not have played in that game. Like, they would have been starting true freshmen in the Big Ten championship game. That was just not a hill worth dying on. I would even go, and, like, this is a bit of a stretch, but I only am willing to entertain it because Curt Cignetti himself kind of has. That stretch he has referenced in saying, people told me this job was hopeless. People told me, Indiana would be happy to just go to bowl games, whatever. Well, I've got recent history that says Indiana is capable of more than that. So why don't you just believe? Why don't you just have some confidence, have some faith, stick with us, and find out how much fun we're going to have together? I think that season, in a roundabout way, that season kind of sets the table for someone like Curt Cignetti to come in and say, you have this fatalistic idea of your football program, yet look what you were just 36 months ago. Don't tell me we can't do it here. Yeah. And I think 19, they needed to win that bucket game for it to feel like more than just a, Indiana's in a bowl game, aren't they happy about it kind of season, if that makes sense. Although, unfortunately, it did play them out of the Music City Bowl, which was a travesty of epic proportions.
Devastating.
I'm trying to think. I mean, I really am. Like, and I tried this a little bit with Nathan. Trying to just sort of inject peril into this game where I can.
Peril?
Is there any peril in your mind? Is there any way? And I know this is dangerous, but there's rivalry games up and down college football this weekend with varying degrees of peril in them. Like, I think I mentioned this on last week's podcast. I've seen so much just sheer terror in the tone of Alabama Twitter going into a stadium that Nick Saban literally, I believe, said once was haunted. In fact, AL.com did a story today, and I haven't read it yet, but I absolutely plan to, that was headlined, "Is Jordan-Hare Stadium Haunted?" If you want to know, like, what rivalry weekend feels like even for good teams. I just I mean, we're at a place where I wouldn't be surprised if the just to the naked eye IU crowd rivals the Purdue crowd. And Purdue fans have stuck around for their team. They have. But, I was at that Ohio State game 2 weeks ago, whatever it was. There was almost as much, scarlet and gray or whatever their colors are as there was black and gold in the stands. And I would not be shocked if it's similar for Indiana, because this is going to be the easiest road game for a lot of IU fans to get to. It is. Can Indiana struggle in this game? Sure, no question. And like I said, it's worth saying Purdue has kept some good teams honest. Michigan, Ohio State, Illinois for a while. But, can Purdue win this game? I find that just very, very hard to sort of talk myself into in my own head.
I mean, it'd have to be a catastrophic failure for Indiana. And I'm not trying to take, be insulting towards Purdue, but I mean, the talent gap is such that right now you'd have to think something injury-wise happened for something to sort of go off the rails like that. There's no evidence that Indiana's really Penn State is a close game, but Penn State has 10 guys that are going to the NFL. This is not the same thing. It's not apples to apples. And so, that game was close, but I mean, they've since won 2 games. I mean, there was talent there. That was a preseason, number 2 team in the country. It just doesn't feel like this is sort of analogous. And, based on what we saw last year, the core of this team's back. We saw what they did last year to Purdue. I mean, Purdue's still trying to figure itself out. I mean, they're in week 13. They don't have a quarterback. I just, like you said, maybe if weather is something that, maybe could play a role where but it had to be weather to the point, not like a nice snowfall like last year. We're talking torrential downpours to convince me that something could turn the tides for Purdue's favor.
Yeah, Caleb says it was 80% Ohio State fans. I was there. It was not. I guarantee you it was closer to 40, 60, 50, 50. But weather is the one thing I come back to as well. It is going to be very cold, and I think it's going to be pretty windy. But that's where you feel like Indiana's better equipped for a game like that this year, because
you can still run the ball in those conditions and not
exactly
impact things. Like I said, rain.
And Purdue has not shown the capacity at any time recently to be able to stop the run. Now, Purdue's coming off a bye week too. Maybe they're a little fresher. Maybe they're better prepared. But Purdue has not shown, even against some good but not great teams, that it can consistently stop the run. And
this can't do that, probably. I mean, we don't have the history. The biggest favorite Indiana has been going into West Lafayette.
I would think so. I would be hard pressed to imagine again that stretch in the 80s was the only time. 2015 they went up there and they won by about 16, 17 points, 53-38, 53-35, something like that. And they would have been favored in that game just because they could score a lot of points and Purdue wasn't very good. But that stretch in the 80s was probably the last time they consistently were just so clearly the better program in the rivalry, just unquestionably the better program. So
I think 89, I looked up maybe they were like 14-point favorites or something in that game.
That sounds right. Yeah, I think
So,
they were
like 2 touchdowns.
favorites.
I mean, this is double that. I mean,
Right.
It's wild as to what the state of things. But
any other business? I mean, I'm not trying to ignore basketball, but we're probably not going to get into it today, and for no reason other than because, just like to be completely honest, I'm taking tomorrow off. They're playing Kansas State tonight. It would seem silly to talk too much about basketball without the Kansas State result or before the Kansas State result is kind of in the can. Also, just football's eating a lot of bandwidth, but we will make time for hoops probably on next week's podcast, though we will have a lot, I'm guessing, to cover. I guess the last piece for me is...
Do you have a prediction for how the Big Ten title game will shake out? Because there's like 8 scenarios or 7 scenarios, but it could be 4 different teams.
Let's
State, obviously.
Hold on, I'm making a note on the time code. This is just on air.
You do that out loud?
Well, I don't normally, but I was just kind of caught. You shifted gears on me too quickly.
Well, you said you had something else. We didn't mention it. We're not going to get back together until after the game. I mean, I guess we could discuss it after the game, but Ohio State option, Oregon and Michigan can sneak in there.
There are 7 tiebreaker scenarios, as you referenced. They are undefeated Ohio State against undefeated Indiana against 1-loss Oregon, undefeated Indiana against 1-loss Michigan, undefeated Ohio State against 1-loss Indiana in 2 different sort of sequence outcomes, 1-loss Oregon against 1-loss Michigan, and 1-loss Michigan against 1-loss Ohio State. The thing to note, if you haven't read our stories this week, basically any of the tiebreaker scenarios where Indiana winds up against one other team, it wins them. Any of the scenarios where Indiana loses the Purdue game and winds up in a multi-team tiebreaker, so more than one other team, it loses out and it misses the Big Ten championship game. It is, I mean, I understand what rivalry games are, and I understand what the Ohio State game, the Michigan-Ohio State game has been in recent years. Michigan just looks too limited the last couple of weeks. I know Haynes is out for at least the regular season. I don't know if he could be back for some kind of postseason action, but it's just hard for me to imagine Ohio State losing that game, even in Ann Arbor, just because Michigan has kind of started to show its age a little bit. And I think Underwood's going to be a really, really good quarterback. I just think that, freshmen by this point and true freshmen by this point in the calendar tend to start looking like it a little bit. I think he is. I think Ohio State is better defensively. I think Ohio State's got better skill players. Obviously, we'll see if Carnell Tate and Jeremiah Smith play. If they don't, could I see an upset? Sure, but I don't know. Like, I don't want to lay this all down on fate, but it does just feel like we are destined for Indiana, Ohio. Like, that is the game.
You'll be disappointed if it's not 1 versus 2. You like it if Oregon sneaks in.
I mean, it will feel just a little weird, right? Like, again, like college football's been waiting for this game all year. Like, this is yeah. Like there's not been a hypothetical matchup that has been talked about more probably since Indiana's win at Oregon, which was early October, than Indiana, Ohio State, and Indianapolis. Yeah. So, is that fair in your mind?
I mean, yeah, it's fair. I mean, Ohio State's done some weird things against Michigan the last couple of years. I mean, that's one where you don't have to stretch to see a game going haywire and Michigan pulling one out just because you have the recent history. Like, this is the state of the Purdue Indiana thing is not the same as Michigan. Michigan has kind of pulled the rabbit out of the hat the last couple of years, and even though Ohio State has been the more talented team, so I mean, and this one being at Michigan does throw that sort of added wrinkle. I think it would be wild if there was chaos. I would not want to see Indiana, Michigan. Just selfishly, I'd rather see them face Oregon or Ohio State, just to sort of. I think the rematch against Oregon on a neutral field would be interesting. You can prove that that win at Autzen wasn't a fluke, and really kind of land the top seed in the CFP. I mean, you can do that with both, but Ohio State obviously has everything else with the Heisman thing. But yeah, no, I mean, those would be the ideal matchups. Yeah, I think it's going to be chalk, but we'll see.
Yeah, I'll go with that. I agree with everything you said. I don't. It's obviously a lot more likely Michigan upsets Ohio State than Purdue upsets Indiana. I don't know. Ohio State has just looked so ruthlessly efficient this season. That and winning a national title last year probably got something off that program's back. I mean, I know rivalry games in general are just different.
Right.
And I think Michigan's won like 4 in a row now. Is that right? 3 in a row, 4 in a row. But I mean, yeah, give me Indiana and Ohio State and Indy, and I think that'll be a fascinating game. And if it is, we'll be here to talk about it. If that is indeed what transpires, we will be here to talk about it next week on Mind Your Banners. But for now, he's Mike Niziolek. Any other business? Thanksgiving business? Anything you got? Nothing.
Thanks to all the readers that have followed along. We really appreciate it.
Thank you to everybody who comes. We get a really consistent crowd in here. Caleb, Justin. I'm going to leave some people out. John Jacobs. Mark Hess. I feel bad. Like I'm going to forget people. I don't want to start listing people because I'm going to forget somebody. But we get a really good crowd.
You started. You already purposely left people off the list. So rude.
Can you just stop stirring for just a minute? I guess really quickly, Derek asked.
He has not been mentioned. He has not been mentioned.
Yeah, no, he is not. He's Mike Niziolek. I'm Zach Osterman. This has been Mind Your Banners for November 25th, 2025. Have a happy Thanksgiving. We will see you all on Friday night.